The night belonged to silence, and silence belonged to her. She was one of the richest women in the city, a name written on buildings, foundations, and charity plaques. Yet on this birthday night she sat completely alone inside the HOA-controlled clubhouse that she herself had paid to renovate years ago. The room was large and polished, filled with soft golden lights that reflected off marble floors, but none of it felt warm. In front of her sat a small cake, perfectly decorated, untouched, the candles unlit because there was no one to sing and no one to smile. Her phone lay face down on the table, not buzzing, not lighting up, not reminding her that she mattered to anyone outside contracts and bank transfers. No guests had arrived because the HOA had restricted the guest list, claiming community image rules. No decorations were allowed because they said birthdays should not become events. Even booking the clubhouse had been made difficult, forced into the last hour of the evening like an afterthought, as if her life did not deserve space. Through the tall glass walls, she could see the HOA board members standing together in quiet groups, whispering, watching her, judging her. Their faces tight with fake smiles and quiet control. They talked about her clothes, her choices, her decision to live alone, her refusal to play social games. To them, she was not a woman sitting alone on her birthday. She was a problem that refused to be managed. She kept her back straight and her hands folded, telling herself she was strong, reminding herself of everything she had survived. But the truth was cruelly simple. This silence hurt more than being poor ever had. Poverty had taught her hunger, but loneliness taught her emptiness. Every second stretched longer than the last, and the ticking of the clock sounded louder than applause ever could. She remembered birthdays from her childhood, when there was no money but there was laughter, when a shared cupcake felt like a celebration, and the memory made her throat tighten. She had built an empire, but tonight that empire felt like a cage. Then, quietly, almost hesitantly, the clubhouse door opened. The sound was small, but it cut through the silence like a crack in glass. She looked up, surprised, expecting an HOA manager ready to complain or remind her of time limits. Instead, a tired-looking man stepped inside, holding the hand of a little girl. His clothes were worn but clean, his shoulders slightly hunched like someone used to apologizing for existing. The little girl clutched a small backpack and looked around with wide eyes, unsure if she had walked into trouble or magic. They both froze when they realized they were not alone. The man's face filled with panic as he quickly pulled his daughter closer, already preparing to leave, already expecting rejection. They were clearly lost, clearly not meant to be there. Before he could speak, the HOA manager rushed forward from the corner of the room, her heels sharp against the floor, her voice tight with authority, telling him he was not allowed inside, that this was a private booking, that residents like him should know their place. The man opened his mouth to apologize, his voice shaking, but the little girl looked up at the woman sitting alone at the table. She smiled. Not a polite smile, not a practiced one, but the kind of smile that comes without fear, without plans, without knowing how powerful it is. That small smile hit the billionaire harder than any insult the HOA had ever thrown at her. For a moment, time stopped. The manager kept talking. The board members leaned closer, waiting to see how she would react, expecting her to nod, to agree, to protect her space. But she did not move. She stared at the child's face and felt something inside her shift, something long buried under meetings and signatures and survival. She saw herself in that little girl, small, unseen, walking into rooms where she did not belong. The silence that had been crushing her moments ago suddenly felt different, as if it was waiting for something instead of mocking her. The man finally spoke, his words rushed and embarrassed, explaining that the rain outside was heavy, that his daughter was tired, that they had been told the clubhouse bathroom was open, that they would leave immediately. The HOA manager rolled her eyes, already planning fines, already tasting power. The billionaire raised her hand slowly, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough to stop the room. Her voice was calm when she spoke, softer than anyone expected, telling the manager to wait. The board members exchanged looks, surprised. She looked at the man and the little girl and told them they could stay for a moment, that there was no rush. The man hesitated, fear written on his face. because people like him were not invited into places like this without consequences. The little girl tugged his hand and whispered something he could not refuse. Slowly, carefully, they stepped further inside. The girl's eyes locked onto the cake, and she asked an innocent question that broke the last wall around the billionaire's heart. Why was there a birthday cake if no one was celebrating? The question hung in the air, simple and honest, and no one had an answer ready. The billionaire felt her chest tighten, but this time the pain was mixed with warmth. She realized that this night, which had begun as a reminder of everything she lacked, was quietly turning into something else. The HOA manager stood frozen, unsure how to regain control. The board members watched, no longer whispering, sensing that something important was happening but not understanding it yet. The billionaire pushed the cake slightly forward, her hand steady despite the storm inside her, and invited the little girl to come closer. The girl laughed softly, as if laughter was natural, as if joy did not need permission. In that moment, the lonely birthday that had been shaped by rules, power, and silence began to change its meaning. The room no longer felt cold. The lights no longer felt harsh. The silence no longer felt empty. And while the HOA believed they still controlled the building, the schedule, and the rules, they had no idea that they were witnessing the first crack in their power, all because a single dad and his little girl had walked into the life of a woman who had everything except the one thing she needed most. The next morning did not feel gentle for the single dad. His name was Daniel, and his life had taught him to wake up early, not because he wanted to, but because fear never slept. He lived in the smallest house at the edge of the HOA neighborhood, the kind of house people pretended not to see when they drove past in shiny cars. The paint on his fence was slightly faded, not because he was careless, but because every extra dollar went to food, school supplies, and keeping his daughter warm. His wife had passed away years ago after a sudden illness, leaving him with grief that never truly healed and a little girl named Emma who depended on him for everything. Daniel worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, fixing appliances during the day and cleaning offices at night, yet the HOA treated him like a criminal. Every week there was a new notice taped to his door. Grass too tall, trash bin visible for 10 minutes too long, mailbox not matching. Community standards. He paid fines he could not afford and apologized even when he had done nothing wrong. That morning, as he walked Emma to the bus stop, he noticed neighbors watching him through curtains, the same way they always did, as if struggle was contagious. Emma held his hand tightly and asked if the nice lady from last night was lonely again today. Daniel did not know how to answer. He had not slept much, his mind replaying the moment in the clubhouse over and over, the silence, the cake, the way the rich woman's eyes looked tired in a way money could not fix. At work, his phone buzzed nonstop with HOA messages, harsher now, colder, warning him about unauthorized entry into a private event, threatening fines and possible action. They did not care that he was lost, that it was raining, that his daughter was scared. To them, rules mattered more than people. Meanwhile, across the neighborhood, the billionaire woke up in a house that felt far too big. Her name was Evelyn, and for the first time in years, her birthday morning did not feel empty. Felt confusing. She stood by the window holding a cup of coffee she forgot to drink, thinking about the little girl's laugh, about Daniel's apologetic eyes, about how easily the HOA manager had tried to erase them. She had lived under HOA pressure too, just in a different way. They smiled at her face but resented her independence, her refusal to attend forced social dinners, her habit of questioning rules. They wanted her rich but obedient. She checked her email and saw messages from the HOA board complaining about last night's disruption, reminding her of policies, subtly blaming her for allowing undesirable behavior. The words made her jaw tighten. For years, she had stayed quiet, believing peace was better than conflict. But something had shifted. That evening, Daniel came home to find another notice, this one more serious, warning him about repeated violations and hinting at eviction if behavior continued. His hands shook as he read it. Emma watched him silently, already learning that fear sometimes lives in paper and envelopes. He tried to smile for her, but his voice cracked when he told her everything would be okay. He did not believe it himself. Later that night, as rain returned, there was a knock on his door. Fear hit him first because HOA visits never brought good news. When he opened the door, he froze. Evelyn stood there. No security, no assistant, just herself, holding a small box. For a second, Daniel thought he was in trouble, that last night had cost him everything. But Evelyn looked at Emma and smiled softly, the same smile from the clubhouse. She apologized for showing up unannounced and said she wanted to return something. A slice of birthday cake wrapped carefully, untouched. She said birthdays should be shared, not wasted. Daniel did not know what to say. No one like her had ever stood on his porch without judgment. Emma's eyes lit up, and she hugged Evelyn without hesitation. That hug broke something open inside Evelyn's chest, something she did not realize had been locked for years. Inside the small house, Evelyn saw life stripped of comfort but full of effort. School drawings on the fridge, patched furniture, quiet strength in every corner. She understood then that the HOA did not just control buildings. It crushed spirits. As she left, she promised nothing out loud, but in her heart, a decision had already been made. The HOA believed they were tightening their grip on Daniel, but they had unknowingly placed him under the protection of someone who had been silent for too long. And while Daniel went to bed that night still afraid of tomorrow, Evelyn went to bed knowing that the loneliness she felt on her birthday had connected her to a fight she was finally ready to face. The days that followed moved slowly, heavy with tension, as if the neighborhood itself sensed that something fragile had been disturbed. Daniel tried to return to his routine, but nothing felt normal anymore. Every step he took outside his house felt watched, measured, judged. The HOA patrol car slowed down every time it passed his street, the driver pretending to check notes while clearly checking him. Neighbors who once ignored him now looked at him with quiet suspicion, as if kindness had become a violation. Emma noticed it too. She stopped drawing on the sidewalk, stopped waving at people, and stayed close to her father, her small hand gripping his shirt whenever a stranger passed. Daniel's heart ached seeing fear grow inside a child who deserved safety. At work, his supervisor warned him that too many complaints from the HOA could cost him his contract, because clients like clean images. Daniel nodded and apologized again, even though he did not understand what crime he had committed except existing in the wrong place. At night, he lay awake thinking about eviction, about losing the only home Emma had ever known, about how one wrong step could push them into darkness. Across the neighborhood, Evelyn watched all of this unfold quietly. She saw the patrol car circling Daniel Street from her balcony. She read the HOA notices that landed in her inbox, written with polite words hiding cruel intent. They spoke of order and standards, but she now understood the truth behind them. The HOA was not protecting community values. It was protecting power. Evelyn decided to attend the next HOA meeting, something she had avoided for years. When she entered the meeting room, conversations stopped. The board members smiled tightly, surprised by her presence, already calculating how to control it. They spoke about budgets, landscaping, image, and violations, carefully avoiding Daniel's name while clearly targeting him. When Evelyn finally spoke, her voice calm but firm, asking why fines were being issued so aggressively to one household, the room grew uncomfortable. The HOA president dismissed her concerns, saying rules applied to everyone equally. Evelyn looked around the table and saw Liz sitting comfortably in expensive chairs. She said nothing more that night, choosing silence as a weapon instead of surrender. Meanwhile, Daniel received another letter, this one demanding he attend a compliance review. Emma cried when she saw him pack papers into a folder, sensing danger even without understanding it. Daniel promised her again that he would fix everything, though fear burned in his chest. On the evening before the review, Evelyn visited them again, this time bringing dinner instead of cake. They sat together at a small table, sharing simple food, talking quietly. Emma laughed, telling Evelyn about school, about how she wanted to be brave like her dad. Evelyn listened, feeling something she had missed for years, belonging. Daniel finally opened up, telling her about the notices, the threats, the feeling of being hunted in his own home. He did not ask for help. He simply told the truth. Evelyn reached across the table and placed her hand gently over his, not promising miracles, not speaking grand words, only saying that no one should be made to feel small for being human. The next day at the compliance review, Daniel walked into a room full of cold faces and folded arms, ready to be judged. What he did not expect was Evelyn walking in behind him. The room froze. The HOA president's smile vanished. Evelyn sat beside Daniel, calm and composed, and asked to review every violation, every fine, every rule cited. Her questions were precise, quiet, unstoppable. The board members stumbled, unprepared to explain cruelty under light. Emma waited outside, clutching her backpack, whispering prayers she had learned from her father. When the meeting ended, no decision was announced, only delays. The HOA needed time. That night, Daniel felt a mix of relief and fear, knowing the fight was far from over. Evelyn returned to her empty house, but it no longer felt empty in the same way. Her loneliness had transformed into purpose. The HOA believed they still controlled the boardroom, the letters, the threats. They did not yet realize that by pushing too hard, by hurting the wrong people, they had awakened a woman who understood power better than they ever would, and who had finally found something worth using it for. The pressure did not ease after the meeting. It sharpened. The HOA did not forgive defiance, especially when it came wrapped in calm questions and quiet strength. Within days, Daniel felt the shift. The friendly delays turned into colder letters, written with sharper language, delivered earlier in the morning as if meant to ruin the day before it even began. The notices no longer spoke of compliance alone. They spoke of consequences. Fines doubled, deadlines shortened. Words like final warning and legal review appeared in bold. Daniel's hands trembled as he read them, not because he did not understand the words, but because he understood exactly what they meant. Eviction was no longer a shadow. It was standing at the door. Emma sensed it too. She stopped asking questions and started watching faces, learning silence far too early. She packed her school bag carefully every morning, as if trying to make herself small enough not to be noticed. Daniel hated that the HOA had taken more than money from him. It had taken his daughter's peace. Evelyn was watching closely. She received copies of the same notices, CC'd deliberately, a quiet threat from the board reminding her that even wealth did not place her above their rules. They expected her to step back, to choose comfort over conflict. Instead, she chose to dig deeper. She began reviewing years of HOA financial reports late into the night, noticing patterns that felt wrong. Missing amounts, vague expenses, vendors paid without explanation. What once looked like strict order now looked like carefully dressed chaos. At the same time, the HOA began to whisper louder. Neighbors were told that Daniel was dangerous, unstable, a rule breaker who would lower property values. Invitations disappeared. Friendly nods turned into cold stares. One evening, someone reported Daniel's car for being parked an inch over the line, and a tow notice was slapped on his windshield within minutes. Daniel stood in the dark parking lot, rain soaking his jacket, staring at the paper like it was a verdict. He wanted to scream, but Emma was watching from the window, and he swallowed the sound. He fixed the car, paid the fine, and went inside, telling her it was nothing. But later that night, when Emma fell asleep clutching her favorite toy, Daniel sat alone at the table and finally broke. Tears fell silently, not from weakness, but from exhaustion. Evelyn received a message from Daniel that night, not asking for help, only saying thank you for standing beside him, even if it cost her peace. That message stayed with her. The next morning, she requested official records from the city, something the HOA could not block. She hired an independent auditor under a shell company, quietly, carefully, the way powerful people move when they are done being polite. Meanwhile, the HOA scheduled an emergency board meeting and sent Daniel a notice demanding he remove unapproved items from his front yard within 24 hours. The items were Emma's small flower pots, painted by hand, placed neatly near the steps. Daniel stared at them, colorful and harmless, and felt anger rise for the first time in years. He knelt beside Emma and explained that they had to move the flowers. Emma asked softly why people hated her drawings and plants. Daniel had no answer that would not hurt. Across the neighborhood, Evelyn arrived at the emergency meeting uninvited. The room stiffened when she entered. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply asked why a child's flower pots were considered violations while missing funds were never discussed. The board members shifted, offended, defensive. The HOA president warned her not to make accusations without proof. Evelyn nodded and said proof was coming. That word, coming, changed the air in the room. Daniel removed the flowers that evening, placing them gently inside the house, promising Emma they would return someday. Outside, the HOA president watched from her car, satisfied. She believed fear had won. What she did not know was that fear had finally reached its limit. Evelyn stood in her home that night, surrounded by documents, reports, and evidence, feeling a strange calm. The loneliness that once defined her birthday had transformed into resolve. The HOA had crossed a line not written in any rulebook. And once crossed, there was no turning back. The neighborhood grew unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy rather than peaceful, as if everyone was holding their breath and waiting for something to break. Daniel stopped checking the mailbox because every envelope felt like a threat. He learned the sound of the HOA truck, the way its engine slowed near his house, the pause that meant another inspection, another reason to punish him. Emma began having trouble sleeping, waking up from small nightmares where men took their house away while she stood frozen and unable to speak. Daniel sat beside her bed every night, promising safety he could no longer guarantee. His voice steady while his heart felt like it was tearing itself apart. He sold personal items quietly, tools he had used for years, just to keep up with fines and legal letters that arrived faster than his paychecks. Each payment felt like bleeding slowly, not enough to end things, but enough to weaken him. The HOA wanted him exhausted, compliant, ready to leave on his own. Evelyn knew this pattern well. She had seen corporations destroy people politely, draining them until resistance disappeared. She refused to let that happen again. She stopped attending social events completely, letting the HOA believe she had retreated. She smiled less in public and spoke less in meetings, allowing the board to relax, to grow careless. Behind the scenes, her work intensified. The auditor's preliminary findings confirmed her instincts: misused funds, selective enforcement, discriminatory practices hidden under clean language. She collected testimonies quietly from other residents, people who had been fined unfairly, silenced, or threatened into obedience. Many were afraid to speak, but when they learned someone powerful was listening, courage slowly returned. Meanwhile, the HOA escalated its attack. Daniel received the final notice late one afternoon, stamped and official, demanding he vacate the property within weeks due to repeated violations and noncompliance. Emma found him sitting on the floor holding the letter, his face pale, his hands shaking. She wrapped her arms around him and said they could live anywhere as long as they stayed together. That sentence broke him completely. He realized then that the HOA had taken his pride, his peace, and now his child's sense of stability. That night, Daniel packed boxes quietly, trying not to cry too loudly, trying not to let Emma see fear take over. Across the neighborhood, Evelyn watched lights go off one by one, knowing what the HOA believed, that Daniel was finished. She made a single phone call and set everything in motion. She contacted city inspectors, housing authorities, and a legal team that specialized in HOA abuse. She did not rush. She timed it carefully. The day before the eviction deadline, she visited Daniel one last time. The house felt empty already, boxes stacked, memories folded away. Evelyn knelt in front of Emma and promised her something simple: that she would not lose her home. Emma did not fully understand, but she believed her. Daniel wanted to ask how, wanted reassurance, but he trusted Evelyn in a way he had not trusted anyone since his wife passed away. When Evelyn left, she returned to her home and waited. The waiting felt familiar, like the silence of her birthday night, but this time it did not hurt. Felt powerful. The HOA board finalized eviction paperwork, congratulating themselves quietly, believing order had been restored. They did not know that every signature they placed that night only tightened the trap around them. The neighborhood slept, unaware that the balance of power had already shifted. and that the cruelty hidden behind neat lawns and polite rules was about to be dragged into the open where it could no longer hide. The eviction day arrived under a clear sky that felt cruel in its brightness. Daniel woke before sunrise, sitting on the edge of the bed, while Emma slept curled beside her favorite stuffed toy. The house was quiet, stripped of warmth, boxes stacked against the walls like proof that defeat had already been accepted. Daniel dressed slowly, each movement heavy, knowing this might be the last morning his daughter woke up in the only home she remembered. He made breakfast with what little food was left, forcing a smile while Emma ate quietly, sensing the weight in the air. Outside, the neighborhood was already awake in its own way. Curtains shifted. Doors opened just enough for eyes to watch. People pretended to water plants or check mail, curiosity wrapped in politeness. They wanted to see what happened to the man who broke the rules. The HOA president arrived early, stepping out of her car in a pressed suit, confidence shining on her face. She held the eviction papers like a trophy, nodding to board members who gathered nearby. To them, this was not a family losing a home. It was a lesson being taught. Daniel stepped onto the porch with Emma beside him, holding his hand tightly. He felt exposed, small, but he stood straight because his daughter was watching. The HOA president began reading from the document, her voice loud and clear, listing violations as if they were crimes. Halfway through, the sound of multiple engines interrupted her. Police cars, city vehicles, and unmarked sedans rolled into the street, one after another, blocking traffic, drawing gasps from the neighbors. The HOA president faltered, confusion breaking her calm. Doors opened. Officials stepped out, badges visible, folders in hand. Evelyn arrived last, walking calmly through the gathering crowd, dressed simply, her presence steady and unshaken. Daniel's heart pounded as he saw her, hope and fear crashing together. Evelyn stood beside him and Emma, placing herself between them and the HOA board without saying a word. A city inspector addressed the HOA president, informing her that the eviction was suspended pending investigation. Another official began questioning board members about financial records, selective enforcement, and misuse of authority. The confidence drained from their faces as reality caught up to them. Neighbors whispered, some shocked, some relieved, some ashamed. The HOA president tried to argue, raising her voice, but it cracked under the weight of evidence. Boxes of documents were carried out of HOA offices, accounts frozen, authority stripped in front of everyone they once intimidated. Daniel felt his knees weaken, but he stayed standing, Emma's hand still in his. Emma looked up at Evelyn and smiled, not fully understanding the battle she had just won. Evelyn knelt beside her and told her she was safe, that her home was safe. Tears finally fell from Daniel's eyes, not hidden this time, because the fear that had lived in his chest for so long was finally leaving. The HOA board members were escorted away for questioning, their power dissolving in daylight. The neighborhood stood silent, watching the rules they feared collapse in minutes. Evelyn looked around at the people who had once ignored her loneliness and Daniel's struggle and felt no anger, only resolve. Justice had arrived not with shouting, but with patience, preparation, and truth. As the officials left and the crowd slowly dispersed, Daniel unlocked his door again, this time not as a man losing his home, but as a father who had protected his child. The house felt different, lighter, safer, alive. The HOA president's car pulled away quietly, no applause, no respect following her. Evelyn watched until it disappeared, knowing this fight had changed all of them. And as the street returned to normal, one truth remained clear. The power that had once ruled this neighborhood had fallen, and it had fallen because it underestimated kindness, courage, and the strength of someone who had once sat alone on her birthday. The weeks that followed felt unreal, as if the neighborhood had woken up from a long, uncomfortable dream. The HOA office stayed closed, its once polished doors locked and silent, the sign on the wall now meaningless. Notices stopped appearing on doors. Patrol cars vanished. The fear that had lived quietly in many homes began to loosen its grip. Daniel noticed it first in small ways, the way neighbors finally met his eyes, the way people smiled at Emma when she walked to the bus stop, the way silence no longer felt like judgment. Inside the house, boxes were unpacked slowly, carefully, not out of urgency but out of gratitude. Emma placed her flower pots back on the front steps, arranging them with care, and this time no one told her to remove them. Daniel watched her from the doorway, his chest tight with emotion, realizing that safety was not just a roof, but the freedom to exist without fear. Evelyn did not return to isolation after the victory. Instead, she opened herself to the community in a way she never had before. She funded an independent oversight committee, transparent and fair, replacing control with accountability. But more than money, she gave presence. She visited neighbors, listened to stories, apologized where systems had failed, even when she was not responsible. Slowly, people stopped seeing her as just a billionaire and began seeing her as a woman who had chosen to stand with them. On the anniversary of her birthday, the clubhouse looked different. It was filled with soft lights, simple decorations, and the sound of real laughter. No guest lists, no rules about image, just people. Daniel and Emma arrived early, nervous but smiling. Emma carried a small handmade card, decorated with bright colors and uneven letters. When she handed it to Evelyn, she hugged her tightly and thanked her for saving their home. Evelyn held the card like it was priceless, tears filling her eyes, as she realized this was the first birthday that did not feel empty in decades. Daniel stood beside them, proud and steady, no longer apologizing for taking up space. As cake was cut and shared, Evelyn looked around the room and understood something deeply. Loneliness had not left her life because she gained power, but because she shared it. The night ended without speeches or applause, only quiet conversations and warmth. Later, as the room emptied, Evelyn sat with Daniel and Emma, watching the lights dim slowly. She did not feel rich in the way the world defined it. She felt whole. The HOA's fall had been public, but its lesson was personal. Rules without humanity become weapons, and silence in the face of cruelty allows it to grow. Daniel tucked Emma into bed that night, in the same house they nearly lost, and whispered that some people enter your life when you least expect them, not to take, but to give. Emma fell asleep smiling, secure and unafraid. Across the neighborhood, Evelyn returned home, but her house no longer felt too big, felt ready. Ready for connection, for purpose, for birthdays filled with meaning instead of silence. And in that quiet peace, 3 lives stood changed forever, bound not by rules or power, but by a single night, a small cake, and a moment of kindness that turned loneliness into family.